Hi, everyone. This is going to be a very important episode. It's part two of my opening redoing of Jesus Words Only, Chapter 1, about canon, how you determine canon. And so I titled this chapter basically, Are Jesus Words the Only True New Covenant Canon? And while I was digging and researching to do more in-depth analysis of canon, I found that Mr. Cureton, or Dr. Cureton, in the 1840s had found in the British Museum the work of Eusebius on what the 12 apostles' principles were in the early church. And you'll see it was to read to the people from the pulpit, basically when you would get up and there would be a reading, which was done even in Jesus' day when he's asked to do the reading. He read from Isaiah. Remember that? And he talked about what that meant. And then he said, This has been fulfilled in your hearing. Do you remember that passage? Well, this is what they're telling. The apostles are telling people what to read from the pulpit. And you'll see it's only Jesus' words, and it admits any reading of epistles to the church. But they could also read what was called the Acts of the Apostles. And you're going to think, well, that's the Acts that we call Acts of the Apostles. That is in our book. But that title actually didn't really exist even for what we call the book of the Acts of the Apostles when that was issued. That was just written and never had a title. But more importantly, the Acts of the Apostles that really come down to us in history were the Clementine Homolies, and they existed in the 100s and the 200s for sure. And then Rufinus basically destroys them by retranslating them into Latin and then destroying the Syriac and Greek versions of these works. However, he didn't completely destroy the content. He just manipulated any reference to Paul and he changed it to Simon Magus. That's what scholars concur is what he's done there. But it also means that you can't necessarily rely upon anything in there anymore, unfortunately, unless one day somebody can prove that we are looking at the original pre-Rufinus version. Rufinus was a Roman Catholic Church, I can't call him a translator, corrupter of the 380s. And he admits, by the way, he's corrupted the text. He says, I've removed anything that would offend a Latin ear, meaning a Latin Christian of the late 380s. So anything that would be inconsistent with the Nicene Creed, for example, would have to be changed. Anything that would be critical of someone who allows you to get rid of Shabbat worship and move it to the day of the sun, which is what Constantine wanted, being a sun worshiper himself, as we've seen and proven on this channel many times. That has to be defended. You have to defend the moving of Shabbat away from Shabbat to a new day, the day of the sun, under the Roman calendar that was created in 321 by Constantine, because he's a sun worshiper who he thinks is himself. But that's a whole nother story. So anyway, we're going to take a look at this. This is a fundamentally, this is a monumental change in the perception that you and I have all had about what is the historicity of the early church Ebion view of canon being Jesus' words only. And we can now prove it from this example. First, show you the main contents that I'm going to be revealing, and I'm going to then, before I go into this in depth, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Dr. Cureton, so you have a confidence that what we're looking at is correct. So this is a recovery of a Syriac version of the works of Eusebius, okay? And Eusebius, in turn, is himself recording the original history of the early apostles and their activity and what they taught. And this would have been likely well before what we know as the 325 post 325 era Eusebius. So he's writing in the 315s, 316s. For example, the Martyrs of Palestine is a work he's writing in the 315, 316 era. So he's an historian long before Nicaea. And so he's telling us things that are honest about what the early church believed. And so it begins in the book here. I'm going to show you, let me show you this book again here, the title page, so you can understand where we are. This book, Ancient Syriac Documents Relative to the Earliest Establishment of Christianity in Edessa. This is a place in Turkey where it was a Christian kingdom. and the neighboring countries from the year after our Lord's ascension to the beginning of the 4th century, discovered, edited, translated, and annotated by the late William Cureton, Doctor of Divinity, Canon of Westminster, member of the Imperial Institute of France. He was a person who worked in the British Museum with these works, the Syriac works that had been recovered from the kingdom of Edessa that had been basically retained by other Christians for centuries and a monastery. But I will get to that later. So this is where it comes from. And now let's go back. I want to explain to you what we're going to do here. So it starts here with this heading, The History of the Church by Eusebius of Caesarea. So that's a famous work that Eusebius had made. However, this portion of it has been deleted. And remember, Rufinus is a great corrupter, so he's likely the one who, in his quote translation, as he did to Origen, he destroys those things he thinks that will offend the Christians of the 380 period. And these very statements you're going to see fundamentally are life-changing. Your perception of early Christianity when you read Eusebius pre-Constantine, this is what you're reading. So it begins with this heading, and then I'm showing you the last paragraph of what is the original writings of the church, okay? And then it's going to break, and I'll show you the break. So a chapter, or they're little principles, and this is principle number 27, okay? And he's talking and still in the history of what the apostles did, the apostles appointed. After he reaches this end of the 27th principle, it stops that type of talk, and it's talking about them as in a different way, and it's no longer got these principles numbered, but all these things, it was not for themselves that the apostles appointed them, but for those who should come after them. So now this is someone reflecting backwards on what they had done, and then they'll give you a more up-to-date version. So this is Eusebius is writing in the early 300s, but he's telling you what the earliest view of the apostolic church was with these 27 principles. I'm going to read you just a few. And that stops at page 30 of this book I've referred to just previously. Now, here is the key principle, what I call the Jesus words only principle, so you know where this is going. And again, in the introduction that Eusebius uses is called the Doctrine of the Apostles. So he's trying to tell you this is what the 12 believed. Okay. Principle number 10. The apostles appointed that except the Old Testament law and the prophets and the gospel, and notice it's singular, probably means the Hebrew gospel of Matthew, and the acts of their own triumphs. And now I know you want to jump to think that's the book of Acts. It could be, but not likely. It meant the Acts that was known as the Acts of the Apostles, a title that was understood for the Clementine Homolies. That was the book of Acts of the Church of the 12. The book of Acts is called the book of Acts by that you think is the title it originally had is not the original title at all. It had no title. It was written for the magistrate judge Theophilus and part of an appeal brief for Paul because there was a pending appeal by the end of the book of Acts. For 2 years later, it would take place, and Paul would be acquitted by Nero, just so you know. And that's by Eusebius' own record and Jerome's own record. He is acquitted in that appeal. And so that's a different subtopic. So does it mean the book of Acts that you think is the book of Acts? No, not likely. It probably means, as you'll see why, it probably just means the book of Acts known as the Clementine Homilies, which Rufinus in the 380s in his infinite wisdom took all the original texts that he was using and made sure they were destroyed throughout Europe, the Syriac and the Greek of the Clementine Homilies, and he would retranslate them into Latin and get rid of the original texts. But fortunately, he did minor modifications to certain sections, which you can tell were about Paul, and he just changed the name Paul to Simon Magus so that you wouldn't have any negative thoughts about Paul. But scholars today concur it's so obviously about Paul that it's a transparent corruption. But that's a whole nother thing. We can talk about the Clementine Homilies a different day. But the book of Acts here does not likely mean what you think is the book of Acts of Luke. But it doesn't matter. But I love the book of Acts. It's a great history for us to assess and test Paul. Let's continue. Let not anything be read on the pulpit of the church. So let me start that over. The apostles appointed that accept the Old Testament and the prophets and the gospel and the acts of their own triumphs, let not anything be read on the pulpit of the church. So that was it. Do you notice something missing? All the epistles. So if you study the canon history that was proposed by Karlstadt in the Reformation, it's the same principle. The words of Jesus come first, okay? Then there's an intermediate. He actually does allow the book of Acts to come intermediately to tell the history of the church, but that does not mean something it's inspired the history of the church, but it is anything that the apostles are recording in there from Jesus or about Jesus, the true apostles, would be reflective of the church position, right? Then that would be the end of it. There's no epistles. That's what Karlstadt said. The epistles are not at the same authority of Jesus Christ. So this is why it's a Jesus words only discovery. I just found last night by digging into the canon history to help make the point of what I was doing in chapter 1 originally years ago, and I'm trying to refresh it with information, and I found this by doing a deep dive. So what I would say you can see from this will it's up to your reflections based on what you can learn, but I believe it means Jesus words only is the principle, and the book of Acts, meaning the Clementine Homolies, but it doesn't matter to me at all if it were the Acts of Luke. I love the book of Acts because it tells you a lot more than you know. You think it's pro Paul, but it isn't. It's somebody. Luke has been duped by Paul because he depicts Paul as teaching in Acts 23 the laws. I believe in all points of the law and the prophets. That's the words of Paul out of the mouth of in the book of Acts. That's Acts 23. In Acts 26, Paul says to King Agrippa, I teach the Jews first and then the Gentiles to repent from sin, turn to God, and do works worthy of repentance. Does that sound like the gospel you've ever heard? Absolutely not. So Luke is being what? Defrauded and doing the best thing he can to try to help his friend Paul win an appeal. He doesn't have a clue what Paul really teaches, or otherwise Luke himself would be an agent of deception by making us think he believes in the law. Paul believed in the law and the prophets in Acts 23, and then in Acts 26 that Paul believes of a gospel of works, of repenting from sin and turning to God and doing works worthy repentance. Absolutely not. He even scorns that idea of doing works. It's kind of inimical and dangerous to you. You might boast. Okay, so Luke Acts is, I love it because that tells us something about what even a person closely associated with Paul doesn't even know what Paul teaches. In the time period of about 57 to 62 AD, still Paul has created a mystery of who and what he really is to the 12 at Jerusalem. And that's also clear in Acts 21, but I digress. So anyway, let's now go a deep dive, and I want to show you these principles of the church, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Cureton after I show you these principles, and they're amazing. They're Ebion principles. All right, so with that introduction, let's begin reading. From the History of the Church by Eusebius of Caesarea, chapter the 13th, 24, the Doctrine of the Apostles. This is from the Curetonian Syriac documents of Eusebius. This is the book we're reading from. Just a little preface. This is all we're going to have extra. The Syriac texts contained in this volume, which is what I'm reading to you, were discovered and transcribed by its lamented author, meaning Cureton, who died a tragic death after an accident, so long ago as 1848. So they're discovered and transcribed by Cureton in 1848. Okay? And for in the preface to the Festal Letters of Athanasius, page 23, he noted, quote, I have found among the Syriac manuscripts in the British Museum a considerable portion of the original Aramaic document, meaning the words, the very language that Jesus was speaking, likely. The Aramaic would have been the Hebrew of the average person in Judea at the time of Christ, which Eusebius cites as preserved in the archives of Edessa. That's a kingdom in Turkey. Okay, just so you know. And various passages from it quoted by several authors with other testimonies which seem to be sufficient to establish the fact of the early conversion of many of the inhabitants of the city of Edessa, and among them of the king himself, although his successors afterwards relapsed into paganism. So Edessa became a Christian kingdom under this king, And so these are the works that were collected in that kingdom of Turkey, Edessa. Let me show you where Edessa is. Edessa, according to Wikipedia Edessa article, is an ancient city in Upper Mesopotamia. Now I'm going to show you to you down here in what is now Urfa or Sanliurfa, Turkey. So, by the way, this is what it's the red, like shaded area. And notice here's Antioch in Syria. And so it's Judea would be over here to the right of Antioch. Tarsus, that's in Turkey, right? That's where Paul said he came from. So Turkey, this is all still Turkey. And you see Aleppo, we've all heard of that name. I think that's actually in Iraq there. So this is the region from which this is very close to Judea, very close to speaking the same language Jesus is speaking, Aramaic. And Syriac is a form or a dialect of Aramaic, and that would have been spoken in all of these regions here in the red, and even from Antioch as well. And also, Syriac could have been a dialect that would be easily understood in Judea because it's a language that is a dialect of Aramaic. All right. Now, what about when this was founded? It was founded during the Hellenistic period by King Seleucus I and Nicator, and he died in 281 BC. He was the founder of the Seleucid Empire. Okay, so that's where these records are from, and therefore they have a lot of authenticity because of their location. Okay, so now we'll read the actual statement that Eusebius said. This is the teachings, the Doctrine of the Apostles. There I have the title at the bottom, the Doctrine of the Apostles. This is the section. 1, Roman numeral. The apostles therefore appointed, quote, pray ye towards the east, and then in quotes, because as the lightning which lights from the east and is seen even to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. That's the sign of the Son of Man prophecies. That's Matthew 24. I don't think that's a mistake why they're emphasizing that by this we may know and understand that he will appear from the east suddenly. Okay, so why is that important? Because this is the Ebion teaching. I want to show you something. This is from Petra Luhmann's article, Ebionites and the Nazarenes, inside of a book called Jewish Christianity Reconsidered, and it's at page 115. And it says this: the Jewish Christianity of Irenaeus' Ebionites, so this is a critical, Irenaeus, speaking in the 180s, approximately early 200s, is critical of the Ebionites. And because they obey the Jewish laws, actually the law of Moses, but that's another thing. We'll talk about that later, including circumcision, which, yes, as a Jewish person, you have to be circumcised. As a Gentile, if you want to go in the temple or you want to celebrate Passover, you have to be circumcised. They didn't get into all that, but that's what it all says. Anti-Paulinism, rejection of Jesus' virginal conception. They believe Jesus was a Davidic heir, and therefore Joseph was the father of Jesus. That also is in all the earliest Gospels that we have surviving. Agnes Lewis is the oldest, and it has it in there. I'll digress. There's many other references. And Conybeare, Oxford Dean, he agrees. Reverence for Jerusalem as the direction of prayer. That's key here. That would be east from almost any place in Judea. So that's why it would say east. He's going to come from the east, but also that's the direction of prayer. So pray towards the east. That is an Ebionite position. Use of Matthew's gospel, and so on and so forth. And Christ's spirit energies at his baptism, that's because it used to say in the Matthew and in Luke, at the baptism, God Yahweh speaks over, said, this day I've begotten thee, quoting Psalm 2, which is the prophecy of the Messiah. Of all things, that gets deleted because in the 380s, Bishop Faustus defeats Augustine in a debate where Bishop Faustus says, see, you can't believe in the Nicene Creed and believe in Matthew's version of and Luke's version of this baptismal account. So rather than keep the baptismal account the way it was, the Latin Vulgate of 405 AD deletes both the Matthew provision and the Luke provision. But what happened? Poor Jerome, he forgot to delete Hebrews 5, verse 5, which it says, the Father Yahweh spoke over Jesus, this day I've begotten thee. He forgot. He missed it. He didn't catch it. But there it is. It still survives by a trace, but it's a direct trace. Anyway, the point here is You're beginning in, you're going to be, I wanted you to see all these principles at once because you're going to see them all reappearing here in this text. All right. Point XI, meaning 11, Roman numeral. Again, the apostles appointed, quote, that whosoever is not acquainted with the faith of the church and the ordinances and laws which are appointed in it should not be a guide and ruler. So if you don't follow the laws that this church teaches, you cannot be a guide or ruler to anybody. And whosoever is acquainted with them and has transgressed them should not minister anymore, because not being confirmed in his ministry, he acts falsely. So anyone who violates the commandments of this, the understanding of the laws that apply to everyone or have been declared, is not to be able to be a minister, not to be able to teach, or not to minister. Notice it's not minister, it's a verb. It's not an actual position. They did not create that term. And we need to understand ruler would be someone like an administrator, like James, the Bishop of Jerusalem was. That only meant he's an overseer in Greek, or a ruler, if you will. So this implicates somebody, because what do we see in Revelation? We see the book of Revelation has somebody is claiming to be an apostle who can't be an apostle. Okay, the apostles has been locked down with Matthias as the 12th, and somebody else is claiming they're also an apostle. And Jesus Christ in Revelation chapter 2 commends the Ephesians for rejecting somebody who claims to be an apostle who can't be. And we've covered that in the book These Words Only in 2005, but we're going to get to it again in this book when we're redoing it via YouTube videos. So clearly, they are worried about someone who's not following the teachings of the church and the laws that it says have to be followed, and that person cannot minister anymore. This sounds very much like they're talking in the first century, in the time that Paul's still alive. Next, number 12, XII. Again, the apostles appointed. So this looks like, to me, Eusebius is quoting from a document, right? That, quote, that whosoever sweareth or lies or bears false witness or goes among sorcerers and soothsayers and Chaldeans means Babylonians, and puts faith in fate, like predestination, and nativities, like I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry, virgin birth, and nativity, which they hold, who know not God, should also, as being a man that knows not God, be dismissed from the ministry and not minister. So this is a exclusion of anyone who does not, let's go back to the prior thing, they teach the virginal conception. They're all, they're all absorbed in nativity that is not true. And if Jesus is not Davidic lineage from Joseph, he cannot be the Messiah to begin with. That's in 2 Samuel chapter 7, as I recollect. Can't be. So they know that, but it was just one sentence, and it's in the Magus Lewis, the earliest gospel ever recovered, a full gospel that says Joseph begat Jesus. It's taken out later. And the Ebionites reject that in the 180s, and they hire Symmachus to fight this mistranslation use of Isaiah 7:14. They say that's not about a virgin, it's about a woman, Isaiah's son named Emmanuel. It's so obvious, you just have to read the next verse or two and you'd see it has nothing to do with a prophecy of somebody coming in the future. It was a son who was already in the womb of Isaiah's wife. That's who Emmanuel's the son of, is Isaiah's wife. But anyway, neither here nor there. But that tells you that they're telling us people who absorb themselves in nativities should not be allowed to teach. That's how strongly they felt about it. They put faith in fate. What does Paul talk about? You are predestined to salvation. And Jesus says, they're saying, no, that's not how it works. You have free will. There is no such thing. And fate was the doctrine of the Pharisees, and they taught that in the book of Jubilees. It was written by a Pharisee in 150 BC, according to Charles, a specialist in that book. And we've covered that, and we're going to do more detail on that article of Charles. We're going to try to reprint it so everybody can see it. It is reprinted at Wesley's right now, but I want to actually put it in a better format, easier to read instead of small type. Now, notice what it talks about. Whoever swears, I swear I'm telling you the truth. Paul says that twice. 4 other times he says, I'm telling you the truth, which is a form of also taking an oath that you're not lying. And Jesus said, in other words, Jesus is not saying oaths are inherently wrong, because the entire 10 Commandments is an oath by the people to keep it, okay, at the end. So anything that's in a legal structure, which is mandated by God, you have to treat differently than what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about if you try to claim, believe me, because I'm telling you, I swear I'm telling you the truth, I'm not lying. That kind of statement is inappropriate, because if you should just leave your words yes or no. Don't try to add to it that I swear I'm telling the truth, I'm not a liar. Don't add that kind of stuff. That's what Jesus is saying, and they're saying it right here. Or somebody who just flat out lies. And we've got a whole series of examples of Paul lying. For example, he says to Agrippa, I'm on trial because I teach a gospel of works worthy of repentance, that teach people to turn from idols and turn from sin, and turn to God, and do works worthy of repentance. That's in Acts 26. He tells them that's why he's on trial. He's on trial because his friend Trophimus violated the temple. That's in Acts 21. He violated the temple in uncircumcised state, and the Jews go crazy. But he's not telling Agrippa the truth. So he provided false testimony, and he's lying. It's so this is the obvious person who's the objective of this. Okay. This is all one person if you really look at it, most of it. Now, I blew this up so you can just see it. So it's just all. Oh, now one more thing. Soothsayers. In Acts 16:16, Luke records that a soothsayer, okay, that's what the Python priestess is. She tells the future, and she's uses trances and gobbledygook, glossalia. She speaks in gibberish that only a priest can interpret, and so you have to have the priest to her interpret. For example, Plutarch for 30 years was a priest from about 70 to 100 A.D. So that is a very well-defined soothsayer process, where the Python priestess provides the gobbledygook and the uh, in the glossalia, if you will, and then the high priest, not the high priest, but the priest assistant to the Delphic oracle or the oracle at Philippi, they both provide messages to the people who are customers, who actually pay for these prophecies from the soothsayer, from the Python priestess, and then the people are happy they got this message. Well, Paul, it allows for many days this woman to endorse him that he teaches a way of self. Now she's demonically controlled. He's going to cast out a demon in the name of Jesus, which is powerful. Anybody can do it who uses the name of Jesus. Jesus says so in Matthew 7:21-23. People don't even know me can do that if they use my name. Cast out a demon in my name or do mighty works in my name, they can do that. But I'm going to tell them I don't know them if they teach anomia, which is apostasy from God's law. That's what's going on in Matthew 7:21-23. But here in Acts 16:16, Paul is clearly getting endorsed in his message of salvation by a soothsayer, and is happy to have her do it for many days. This is not a pleasant thing, and something they remembered and did not forget. So reading the book of Acts is very important to know what Paul did wrong and allowed to happen. He should have immediately turned around and said, "Get away from me, you demonically controlled spirit. Do not endorse me." That's what Jesus would do. The demons would try to endorse him too, and he doesn't want to be endorsed. So that's the whole thing. Paul didn't mind being endorsed by a demonic controlled spirit, the Python priestess. That's the problem. Jesus would never let them do that, because that would just not be right. And you have to stop that. But Paul allows it, which means he's consorting with the sorcerer, consorting with the soothsayer, so on and so forth. All right, so it's just overwhelmingly obvious who this is about here. But also, please do not forget, this dovetails directly into what we talked about earlier, the summary by Loemanen of the Ebionites being proponents that there is no virgin birth. Otherwise, Jesus can't be the Messiah. So obvious. But we are dumb Christians. We are not aware of the prophecy of the Davidic line in the book of Samuel. Samuel's a prophet of God. He says he has to be of the seed of David. Can't be from the seed of Mary. It has to be from the seed of David. She doesn't even have a seed. You see the whole point? So the prophecy involves the seed of a man, not of the woman's egg. That's just ridiculous. And so we are dumb Gentiles. I don't know how often I have to say it. We were duped in the 180s. This does not exist in any Bible earlier. The earliest Bible being Agnes Lewis. Again, to repeat, it says right there, Joseph begat Jesus. And that's why this is so clear. And that's why focusing on nativities is wrong. All right. Now, let's keep going. 17. Again, the apostles appointed that it is not lawful for the guide to do things which pertain to the church apart from those who minister with him, but with the counsel of them, all let him order, and that be done which all of them assent to and object not. So, for example, if someone like Paul is claiming he is not subject to the authority of the 12, which he clearly says he isn't. He's in fact is superior to them, he says, and they're false apostles, or implies that clearly in Galatians. He talks about them teaching another Jesus and a different gospel. And then, obviously they do have a different gospel because Jesus has a different gospel. So they're saying you can't do that. The 12 are saying nobody can minister with us who will not accept the consensus of how to do this. It's just an axiomatic thing of any group of people who are trying to pass a message on. You can't have two messages. You've got to have a single focused message. For chapter 19 or proposition 19. Again, the apostles appointed, quote, in the service of the church, repeat day by day David's songs of praise. On account of this, I will bless the Lord always. And that's Yahweh. So they're using the word Yahweh in their congregation. And his praises are always in my mouth, and in the day and in the night will I meditate and speak and cause my voice to be heard before thee. So I just thought I'd put that in there. Showing a loving attention to Yahweh is part of the worship of the church of the Ebion. 20. Again, the apostles appointed, quote, such as divest themselves of mammon and run not after the gain of money, let them be chosen in advance in the ministry of the altar. So anybody who comes and wants to preach to you because they're going to make money, that is not appropriate. When Jesus talked about the worker is worthy of his wage, he's talking about you can go into a town, find a person who's worthy, and stay in their home, because that's right in the law of hospitality to any stranger. You are obligated to help any stranger along the road who needs some time overnight. There was no Motel 6s in those days. And what it was is everybody was obligated to open their doors and take the stranger in and feed them and take care of them. But if the stranger decided they want to stay for a while and it was okay with you, and they started to do work around the house, they were entitled by the law to get paid a fair wage for doing that. And that's why it's called the principle in Judaism was always called the worker is worthy of his wage, meaning the guest in your home who you've allowed to come into your home and allowed to then do work like cleaning up the barns and the stalls and getting the crops in. You got to pay them. You can't just take advantage of them. So because you still have to have been doing this for a charitable purpose to begin with. And if you don't, if you start making them do things for nothing, that's unfair. And so that's why God's law is very consistent, and that's what that was about. So now you can see that's the only way a minister can be supported, if they do become a guest in someone's home and are allowed to take advantage of the law of hospitality that includes the duty to get paid when you do work for that person you're residing with. That's all in the book called The Matthean Community of Food Exchange. It's a good book to read, and it educate you to a radically new idea of what he's really talking about. So Jesus said, as to ministry, you're not allowed to take any money. He says, you freely received, you must freely give. That's what he told the 12. When you go out and you preach the gospel of the kingdom, you must freely give and not take any money, is essence what he's saying. But I'm going to allow you to take money if you live in someone's home and you end up you're allowed to work by that person in their home, and they then must owe you a worker is worthy of his wage principle, but not to preach and teach. Because why would Jesus say that? Because when you preach and teach and you care about what people think, you will start, and you get paid for it. You will mold your opinions, your views, according to what you think people will pay you for. And that is definitely going to corrupt you. So you never, ever ask for money from people who are going to actually use that to control you, to tell you what you have to believe or teach. And Jesus was very careful to be protective of that. And they did, and the apostles were too. But Paul completely goes against that, and he says, no, we are entitled to pay. And that's why he says, he takes this passage about you cannot muzzle an ox, which is about God caring for oxen, that you can't, muzzle its mouth while it's trying to tread out the grain. But Paul says, no, this is altogether nothing to do with an oxen. It altogether has to do with us, the ministers to you, and you have to pay us money. That's what he says, clear as day. Violates God's law, eviscerates God's law first, then violates Jesus' words, and then after destroying this passage, saying God doesn't even care about oxen, he then corruptly asks for money. And this is why they're saying these things. The person has to have no interest in money and never seek gain of money by preaching and teaching. It's just a verboten. Jesus said so, and they follow the same principle. Okay, now paragraph or principle 23. And tell me who you think this is about. Again, the apostles appointed this following principle. Those who are high-minded and puffed up with the pride of boasting, let them not be promoted to the ministry. quote, because that which is exalted among men is abominated before God, or abominable before God, end of quote. And against them it is said, quote, I will return the recompense upon those that are proud. All you have to do is look at 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Paul goes on and on from verse 1 all the way to the end, telling you how wonderful he is, and he's suffered more. He's done more than the 12 apostles. He's suffered more than anybody else. And I can't help read that, but go, what about the people you caused to blaspheme God? They're going to hell because of you. You're hoping that you're going to heaven, but you've sent them to hell, and you don't simply care at all. And you murdered people. You murdered Stephen. You participated in the murder of Stephen. You said you killed others. You beat other people. How can you say that you suffered more than them? Particularly people you've murdered and people you've sent to hell through causing them to blaspheme. I can't even fathom how he could say what he said. But moreover, he's boasting. Why tell us all about the wonderful things you've done? Why don't you just be modest and humble about it, and don't tell us all the wonderful, great things you've done? But it's who is this church talking to? Can only be one person. And I just want to say here, it's over now. But later in this work that Eusebius is summarizing and quoting, it mentions something that's only in the Clementine Homilies. I just want to show you this. But Nicodemus and Gamaliel, chiefs of the synagogue of the Jews, came to the apostles secretly, consenting to their doctrine. That's now Nicodemus. We don't know from talking to Jesus alone that he was pro Jesus, but we definitely learn in the Clementine Homilies that Gamaliel had secretly met with James and the apostles, and they had decided that Gamaliel was willing to he consented to the movement, and he agreed with it. And then when you see in Sanhedrin meetings, he defended them that they should be left alone. And that's all you see in the book of Acts. But this is the behind the scenes, what's really going on, and the Clementine Homilies reveals that. Okay, so let's see if I have anything to show you else. How we clearly can know where it ends, where he's quoting the original writings of the church, is at 27. He says, again, the apostles pointed. In essence, he's saying these are quotations, that the bread of oblation, etc., etc. So now I just want to show you when Eusebius goes to the next topic, it's very clear he's talking as a narrator after they're dead. And the principles he's now going to say are just simply principles maybe of the church at large after their death. But all these things, it was not for themselves that the apostles appointed them, but for those who should come after them. So obviously the apostles are not being quoted anymore. It's Eusebius is commenting. He's the narrator. He's interjecting himself in this topic. So that's where you can pinpoint where the original principle stopped, and he stopped numbering the paragraphs. That's how you also know. And I want to just interject a little bit here where Professor James Tabor did a video called Were the Ebionites Heretics or a Best Witness to the Teachings of the Original Followers of Jesus, meaning the apostles? So the answer is it's not the Ebionites are not a remnant of the 12. They were the 12. And we know that from a couple of things, which are, first of all, Professor Eisman says, no, the Ebion are actually from 50 AD by paleographical evidence that scholars have agreed, the works that are the Habakkuk Pesher, which mention the Ebion fighting a spouter of lies about the interpretation of Habakkuk 2, verse 4. Is it really faith is how you live by, or is it by your steadfastness? And the word emunah is translated by Paul as faith, but in the Hebrew Bible, the correct translation would be a steadfastness, fidelity, that kind of concept. Emunah is steadfastness. So emunah, you shall live by, the just shall live by. Emunah meaning their steadfast fidelity to God. So that's the debate going on in the Habakkuk Pesher, and Eisman says this is it's the Ebion, led by the Zadik, meaning the just one. James the Just is the Bishop of Jerusalem, and that's his moniker is the Just One. Even in that era, everybody knows that. So that's who that was, and who's the spouter of lies. You can do your own, you can do the math. Who's the outlier? So Professor Tabor is very sober-minded because he's one of the first people to break out in the what I would call traditional academics. Eisman is not a specialist in Christianity. He just found his way in there by accident. He was trying to do the Dead Sea Scrolls analysis, and it came back to the Christianity. But Tabor has always been teaching Christianity And he says, I offer a counter approach to the idea that the Ebionites are heretics. And he says, he believes you should connect the Ebionites to the Mother Jerusalem Church of James the Just and his followers. Wow, that's amazing. So it's a big deal that changed. Now let's back up real quick, because I don't want to make this go too long. That I'll tell you who Cureton was, Dr. Cureton, so you get an idea of how valid his work is and trustworthy it would be. Okay, so here is the biography of William Cureton by the, remember, Cureton dies, and Wright finishes the work off and presents it to the public. And so he's doing this for his friend by a promise he made to him. Just so you know who Wright is, he's a PhD, LLD, which I think means he's a doctor of law. And I think that's what we would say in the United States, but it's in England, so maybe it's different. He is from an assistant in the Department of Manuscripts in the British Museum. So he worked with Cureton. They both had this office inside the British Museum they worked at. He says this: William Cureton was born at Westbury in Shropshire in the year 1808, received his earlier education at the Free Grammar School of Newport in the same county, and proceeded to Oxford with a Careswell exhibition at the age of 18. So obviously he was very accomplished. For private reasons, which reflected the highest credit on him, he entered Christ's Church as a servitor and graduated in 1830. In the following year, he took holy orders, meaning he became probably an Anglican priest, I would assume, and was appointed under librarian of the Bodleian Library in 1834. Okay, so he's got an important post. He continued in that post until 1837, when he was called to the British Museum as assistant keeper of the manuscripts, having been selected for this office principally on account of his Oriental scholarship. Okay, now I'm going to break it off there and end it there. But look for the next episode here. I'm going to do a supplement to this, which is very interesting, because even in the section where Eusebius is writing, you won't believe it, but he's going to tell you all the places where the apostles went. Jerusalem, there was James the ruler, right? Bishop James. And then he's going to talk about Egypt. Who went there? Mark went to Egypt. And you're going to see India. That's where Judas Thomas went. And Antioch and Syria and Galatia, even to Pontus. And I was thinking this is going to be the time when he's going to mention Paul. No, he says Simon Cephas, who himself laid the foundations of the church there. If you read the Clementine Homolies, you'll see that's where Peter goes. He's trailing Paul. Is what he's doing is in the Clementine Homilies. As long as you replace the word Simon Magus with Paul, you'll see he's following him, and he's trying to give the message to counter the message of this guy ahead of him. That's what's really going on according to the original church history. And then what about Rome and old Italy and Spain and Britain? Who's going to be the apostle there? It's Simon Cephas and so on. How about Antioch, where Paul supposedly exists? That's the same thing. He's saying the city of Rome, Italy, Spain, and Britain, Gaul, all received the apostles' hand of priesthood from Simon Cephas, who went up from Antioch and became ruler and guide there in the church. Wow. How about this? Ephesus and Thessalonica and all Asia. I think I'm going to hear about Paul. No, you're going to hear this. Guess this, and the country of the Corinthians. Where is this going to be about Paul? No. How about Achaia? No. They received the apostles' hand of priesthood from whom? John the Evangelist. Where's Paul? He's a Zippo. He's a Nada. Nicaea, Nicomedia, and all the county of Bithynia and of the Gothia and the regions about received the apostles' hand. I would assume again, is there Paul going to be here? No. Andrew, the brother of Simon Cephas, he was the guy who was the guide and ruler of the church, which was built there. So on and on it goes. And then even Luke built up the church in the county of Thrace in Byzantium. That's Turkey. What happened to Paul? He's a zero. He's a nothing. He's a nada. And so on and on it goes. So I'm going to show you this next time. It's a shocker again. And this is Eusebius telling the history. And he's done everything he can to eliminate Paul himself in his own history of the church, because that's where Eusebius is really coming from. He is obviously a secret Ebionite. Now I see it all. And I see how he was trying to protect and defend the church while under the influence of Constantine, and had no choice, he felt, but to try to preserve the history of the church before it would be destroyed. And I'm sure he was thinking it could be destroyed by Constantine. And he had done all this historical work himself before Constantine comes to power. These are 315, 316 in power over the church, meaning trying to tell us what to believe and think. Anyway, okay. So anyway, look for this. It's exciting. And Paul is never mentioned as an apostle in this work. by Eusebius. Really fantastic work. It's a real revelator. How can I put it? It's really going to make you think over again in your whole heart. Oh my gosh, how could this be true? Eusebius is not telling us that Paul's an apostle, not giving him credit for any of these missions to Ephesus and Asia. Come on. No, he's a zero. He's a nada. All right. God bless. Look for that next episode. God bless. Take care. Ciao. Bye.